Record. Hello, everybody. Welcome, Parshas Vayeshev. Okay, here we have the story of Yosef going into being sold by his brothers to first the Yishmaelim, Midyanim, and then to Potiphar in Mitzrayim, and everything that occurs to him there. So there are, as always, there is so much that we can take from this week's Parsha for strength in this time. I'm going to zoom in on the lesson itself, as the lesson itself that we will be learning today should have really obvious implications. So we are going to look at the fact that Yosef was met with a corrupt world, a world that everything that he tried to do right, he was met with injustice. And yet, how did he conduct himself? And what did he stay focused on? And alternatively, how did he not react? And what we can learn from that. So as always, the lessons that I give over here are from this sefer called Shulchan. You can't see it because of the Shulchan Shabbos. And it is based on the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Sichos. And it's a 2-page summary in Hebrew, modern Hebrew. So I actually have to translate some of the modern Hebrew words before class. And I'm gonna learn this with you. So let's begin. So first of all, so as we mentioned, Parshas HaShavua, Megoleles Lefaninu es Sipur shel Yosef, shenimkar le'eved b'Mitzrayim. So this Parsha reveals to us the story of Yosef that is sold as a slave to Mitzrayim. HaParsha misaperes es korosav v'tilaosav. So the Parsha tells us about the happenings and the hardships. V'samahalchem sheheviuhu le'achar mikan. And the goings, the happenings, the hardships, the sufferings that happened, and where it brought him, how it brought him, letafkid HaMishnah Lamelech b'Mitzrayim, how it ended up bringing him in next week's parsha to be appointed as the Mishnah Lamelech, the second to the king in Mitzrayim. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna read it in the Hebrew. I'll look at the Hebrew for myself, but I understand that it could be difficult to listen to the Hebrew when you don't see it inside, and especially if you aren't familiar with Hebrew, it could be distracting. So I'm gonna actually not do that and continue. So what we study in this week's parsha is Yosef's lot, his fate, his life story, and what we will see in the course of our learning here today is how truly the story of Yosef is the story of the Jewish people in exile. As we know, he was the first Jewish person to go into exile. He was the first Jew to go to Mitzrayim, and that was the catalyst that then brought the rest of his brothers and his father down to Mitzrayim, which of course led to Galus Mitzrayim, the exile of the Jewish people in Egypt. And that was the first exile of the 4 Galioses, the 4 exiles of the Jewish people. So here Yosef going into Mitzrayim is the beginning of the entire idea of exile. And so therefore, his story will, as we will see, be a blueprint as well as a lesson for the Jewish people in exile up till today. So Yosef was a 17-year-old boy. He was a child, the favorite son of his father Yaakov Avinu, and he was torn away suddenly from his family, from his house, from his family, from his land, and he was sold as a slave in a strange land. Of course, always on my mind in these week's parshas it's amazing how literally every week there's been a reference, a symbolic reference to the hostages, and realizing that the hostages are all of us. Why? That's exile. Galus is a state when we are not home. We are not home within ourselves, and we are not home with the Beis HaMikdash in the Holy Land as we all should be. So as we look at the hostages in 2023 our Jewish brothers and sisters that are still being held in Gaza. And we also identify with it. And we look at ourselves and we say, we just like we say to the world, bring them home, bring them home. I've heard a few times now people saying that's the message to ourselves. Bring me home. I need to come back into myself, into my truest self being my neshama, my godly soul, who I really am. And of course, bring us all home to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, not only the state of Israel, but the holy land of Israel in a way that reveals its holiness, of course, with the Beis HaMikdash and Mashiach. So may that be the case immediately. So whenever we're referring to the hostages, it's both the literal hostages of today, as well as identifying with this state of being hostage. And as we see here, that's the state of exile, as Yosef was torn away suddenly from his home, from his family, from his land, and sold to a strange land. That is the Jewish people today in exile. So he was this young boy, this young lad that fell into a harsh and cruel reality. And worst of all, it was for no injustice of his own. He did nothing wrong, nothing wrong. And yet his brothers sold him, and he was torn away from his family and brought into a strange land. And not only a strange land, but an awful place, a truly awful place. Cruel and harsh reality. And we'll see why, not only in general, how Mitzrayim was such a place. It was the lowest place in the world in terms of immorality and morality of the time, but also how they treated him personally. So, any other person, the Lubavitch Rebbe explains in this Sikha, if you look at his life, this is a very simple lesson that we're going to be learning. You just look at his life and you empathize a little bit with what he went through. And you think, what if I was in such a state? What if that happened to me? And we recognize, goodness, any other person in such a state would have become embittered, despondent, despair, or at the very least apathetic to his situation. Right? Feel familiar, anybody? And as we'll explain, the way that the world is treating us, the way that the injustice, the cruelty, the lies that we are confronted with as Jewish people in exile, it's so easy for that to lead us to bitterness and despondency and despair, or at the very least apathy. And yet, Yosef understood that it was his job, his mission, to cope with reality as it was. What does that mean? So what did he do? As a servant of Potiphar, he did his work in the best way possible. Talking about not being a victim, right? Not only emotional victimhood, but he led his life with a purpose, and he did what he needed to do. He did his part. So if he found himself as a servant in somebody's house, then he did his job. And he did his job well, as best as he could, until it became clear that he was so incredibly successful. He became the head of the house because of his success. And everything that he touched, the Torah describes how everything he touched blossomed with success. And everybody saw what a successful person he was. And we look and we say, wait, this is a boy taken hostage from his house, sold into slavery in a strange land, and he somehow had the fortitude to work hard and do the best he could and give it his all without despondency, without depression, without apathy, without victimhood. And the Rebbe says like this: and again, this is paraphrasing the words of Hasicha, but the idea is ki zeh hu Yehudi. This is a Jew. Shebechol mikre uvechol matzav, that anything that happens to him, any situation that he finds himself in, he is able to fulfill his tafkid, his mission, his shlichus, some might say, his shlichus, his purpose, his job, the job that he has to do in front of him, in a way, in a good, terrific way, in a excellent way, with excellence. Whatever it is that is in front of us that we need to do, we do. That's what a Jew is. So let's explain a little bit more why and how amazing this is of Yosef. See, how did his master, Potiphar, repay him and return his loyal service? Here he was this incredibly loyal servant, brought success to the entire house estate of Potiphar. And how did Potiphar repay him? By throwing him into a dungeon. And for what? Why? Because he refused to betray his master. So his master Potiphar's wife was trying to seduce Yosef, and because Yosef did not want to betray his master, cheat on his master, he didn't want to be together with his wife, because he was a loyal servant to Potiphar, and also because it was an avera that he was staying away from. I'll actually read the pasuk to you so you could see it. So she's trying to seduce him, and he says, look, there's nobody greater than I in this house, meaning he was given leadership of the entire house, and my master gave me everything in his house that belongs to him. He's given to me, except for you, since you are his wife. So how can I do this great evil and sin to God, right? How can I repay? How can I do this to my master when I am a loyal servant to him? So he was serving his master Potiphar with incredible loyalty and devotion. And how did his master repay his service? By throwing him in a dungeon. And of course, we know that Potiphar's wife distorted what happened and lied about what happened and said he tried to hurt me and he tried to get, assault me, when that was a complete distortion of the truth. And again, I'm thinking of where we are today in the world and the gullus, the exile, the state of the nations of the world that we find ourselves in, that the truth is so distorted. How literally there is no army in the world that goes about war with as much moral and ethics, sterling morals and ethics, than the IDF. The IDF is the one that teaches other armies in the world how to conduct themselves in the best way, trying their utmost best to not hurt civilians as much as they can avoid to do so, and literally warning where they're going to attack before they attack, even though they already told them to leave the area a long time ago. So we know of the army of Israel because we see the truth. We know. And yet the world completely distorts into the opposite, into the exact opposite. Saying, oh, you're the aggressors. We're the victims. You're the aggressors. Look at all this civilian damage you're doing. When literally the complete opposite is the truth. So here we see Yosef was presented with and experienced this kind of distortion and lying, that here he was behaving in a sterling ethical manner and serving his master as best as possible in the most upright way, refusing to go along with his wife's seduction, and yet it completely gets turned on his head. So Yosef, however, continued to prove his diligence and integrity and righteousness, not because he was being responded to in kind. In fact, the opposite was true. The reaction to the good that he was doing was to throw him in the dungeon. And yet he continued to act in such a way with integrity and righteousness, no matter what kind of response he was going to get from others. And he did not fall into despair, and he did not change the way of his life, right? His style of living, his approach to life, his attitude on life, of moral clarity, of holiness. That we know that he stayed with the Torah that Yaakov taught him, right? All the way until he told his brothers in a few parshas from now, go tell Yaakov that I remember the Torah that he taught me. So he continued to live his life in a righteous, holy, ethical, moral way, no matter what kind of responses he got from the people around him. And even, so we just had the Potiphar incident. So now he's thrown into a dungeon, and he now in the dungeon, in the prison, he continues to act in this way, in a straightforward way, an upright way, and he makes the best of his situation. So if he finds himself as a servant of Potiphar, he's gonna work his hardest and do his best without resentment and without victimhood. And if he's thrown into a prison, he works his hardest and does his best with the situation that he has, and he copes with it. He copes with the reality with as much fortitude and positivity that he can. And he's successful in prison, so much so that they didn't turn him into the head of the prison. And we have again in the prison, Asher Hu Oseh Hashem Matzliach. And this is echoing a previous pasuk in the beginning of the parsha, how Hashem made everything. Hashem was with him. Hashem Matzliach biyado. Whatever he did, Hashem made him successful. That was in Potiphar's house. And here again, we have later in the parsha, in prison, again, everything he did, Hashem made him successful. And once again, we have the phrase, Ki zehu Yehudi, because this is a Jew. That even when our moral clarity, our uprightness, our justice, our goodness is met with ingratitude, and not only ingratitude, but corruption and distortion. And when we're met with this from our surroundings, the nations around us, we do not change an iota of our emunah, our emunah, our faith in Hashem, our way of life, our attitude, and our devotion to our mission. Our ability to focus on what must be done and why I was put in the world and what's my part here. I want to quote to you, I heard recently, we have a Tehillim, Keli lama azaftani. And we're told that Esther said these words as well when she went to Achashverosh. And I heard a beautiful insight. Keli lama azaftani, Hashem, my God, why have you left me? And we can change the words lama. Why? To mean lima. For what? What a powerful paradigm shift. Not, God, why have you done this to me? Why is, no matter what I do, no matter what good the state of Israel does, no matter what good the Jewish people do, we're a nation of chesed and incredible kindness, as we have seen like never before. And we even knew that before, and now we see it even more. Kindness and goodness. And people also mention, you know, the good that Israel has brought to the world in terms of technology and medicine, and I mean, study psychology in every area. We have brought so much goodness to the world, so much light to the world. Why is it mixed with corruption and lies and hate? And yet we can shift that. Not a Jew doesn't ask why, a Jew asks for what? For what? What is the purpose here? What is my purpose here? What is something I can do? So, and I remember a lot of the leaders of spiritual leaders, Rabbi Jacobson, Rabbi Taub, listening to their videos in the first few weeks of the war and since. So many of them had said, we can discuss from today until tomorrow the whys. How could God have? Why? At the end of the day, we don't know. First of all, that's the mystery of the world. That's the mystery of Galus. When God is not revealed, we don't understand his ways. But what a Jew does need to ask is for what? What can I do? What is my purpose? What is my job here? What's the next step I can take? And that we see so clearly is how Yosef conducted himself in the entire ordeal, in all the aspects of this story. So we had it when he was in Potiphar's house, not a victimhood, why, how, despair, despondency, but he got up and he did his job. In the dungeon, how could he have repaid me in this way? But nope, he got up and he did what he needed to do. And not just that he needed to do it, he took the initiative. He's like, okay, what can I do here? What's my job here? How can I make the best of the situation? And how can I conduct myself in the most upright way, even when I am faced with corruption and distortion and injustice? And once again, we see this again later. We see this again. So to continue, we see this over and over again. In prison, he sees that the sarim, the officers, Sarah Mashkim and Sarah Ophim, the chief butler and chief baker of the king that were imprisoned at the time that he was there, he saw that they were upset, irritated, something was bothering them. And first of all, I think this is an incredible lesson for everybody at all times, to do what Yosef did in prison. Vayar osam v'hine zo'afim, and he saw them that they were depressed. Vayeshal, and he asked them, Madua pneichem ra'im, I'm skipping a few words, but Madua pneichem ra'im hayom. Why do you look so grim today? Why do you look so bad, so negative? What's bothering you? And that in itself is such an incredible lesson for us to take wherever we are. If we see somebody looking down, to ask them, what's going on with you? How you doing? I see you're looking perturbed. Can I help you? So that's a little bit of an aside, but something that strikes me every time I learn this parsha. So he asks them, and here again, he could have had so much resentment against officers of Paro, because Potiphar was an officer of Paro, and look how he treated Yosef, throwing him into a dungeon after everything he did for him. He could have been stirring in this, sitting with this resentment, and attribute that to all officers of Paro, right? Isn't that what we do with resentment? We generalize. And yet, he did not act this way, and he did not feel this way. And when he saw that the officers of Potiphar were imprisoned, and one of them was also imprisoned for no fault of his own, he didn't misameach on that. He wasn't happy about that. He didn't, rejoice in his suffering, but rather he said, how can I help him? What can I do? And he offered advice. He offered to interpret their dreams, and they helped him out. And yet, and so he had one humble request. Please, I'm just asking you if you can please mention me to Paro. And once again, Yosef's goodness Yosef's kindness, Yosef conducting himself in an upright, good way, was met with ingratitude. And the officer forgot, completely disregarded this request, did not go to Paro, did not help him until 2 years later, and all of a sudden he thought of it, right? And once again, when we see later, not this week's parsha, when Yosef becomes second to the king by incredible hashgacha, incredible events, and he's in a position of power. He's appointed second to the king. There's no limitations on him. He can make whatever laws he wants. Nobody's stopping him. Here he had an opportunity for revenge. Potiphar, Sar Hamashkim, in general, the people of Egypt for how they treated him. He had the opportunity for revenge for all the people that did bad on him. But does he do that? Does he take revenge on them? No, he does not. That is not how Yosef behaves. And as he is second in command, as he is second to the king in Egypt, what does he do? Once again, he figures out, how can I be the best in the position that I'm in? So if he's Potiphar's servant, how can I be the best Potiphar's servant? If he's in prison, how can I be the best in prison? If he is second to the king, how can I fulfill this role to the best of my ability? And he used all of his talents to benefit the country and to save not only Mitzrayim, but the entire world from famine. This is the story of the Jewish people in all of the exiles that we've endured up until today. And I look at this Sikha and I wonder, what did people think when the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke like this at this time? Did they experience this at that time the way that we do today? The way that how incredibly obvious it is to us today more than ever that no matter what good the state of Israel does, no matter what good the Jewish people do, no matter what kind, upright people we are that lead the world with ethics and morals and teaches the world and is a light unto the world. And yet we are met with distortion, corruption, and hate. And we're thrown down again and again and again. And yet looking at Yosef, how he conducted himself no matter where he was, we learn how to behave in exile, how to behave how to conduct ourselves in a world that will always distort what we are trying to do and what our essence is. And what is that? How is that we behave? We tune out all of that. We don't let it get to us. And as we know in a few parshas from now, Yosef is the one that teaches us what other people do to me. I don't take it out on them because it's from Hashem. This is what he told his brothers, right? This is from Hashem. I'm not upset at you. Hashem wanted me to come down to Mitzrayim. So we don't get busy with victimhood and resentment and anger and this, how could they? We don't get busy with that. We tune that out and we stay focused on what is my job. Where do I find myself today? And how can I conduct myself in the most upright, best, beautiful, holy way possible with the job I have before me? If I am a wife, how can I fulfill that to the highest? If I am a mother, how can I be the best mother? If I am a teacher, how can I be the best teacher? If I have a job to do, how can I give myself over to the job I need to do? And of course, the job of each and every one of us is to ultimately take us out of Galus by bringing Mashiach and doing another mitzvah and another mitzvah and another mitzvah. And that is our job. That is the vision we need to have of what do I need to do? How can I focus on my job and ultimately, may that bring us to Mashiach in reality. So we will never have this gullus mindset again. All right, everybody. Have a beautiful Shabbos and a happy, happy Hanukkah.